Hmm. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and when you're done, drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this reaches. I almost didn't go. I sat in my truck outside the Haverford estate for 11 minutes before I finally opened the door. I know it was 11 minutes because I watched the clock on the dashboard tick from 4,047 to 4,058, my hands resting in my lap, my dress shirt already feeling too tight around the collar. A man doesn't drive 4 hours to sit in a parking lot, but a man also doesn't walk into a room where he absolutely knows that he is not welcome. My son Tyler was graduating from medical school today. I found out about the ceremony the same way I find out about most things in Tyler's life anymore. His aunt, my sister Carol, had mentioned it in passing during our weekly phone call. The way you mention something you assume everyone already knows. You must be so proud about Tyler's graduation, she'd said. June 14th at the Haverford estate. I saw it on Linda's Facebook. Linda, my ex-wife. The woman who had spent the last 18 years making sure Tyler understood one thing above all else, that I had chosen to leave and that Gary had chosen to stay. I had not been invited. But I went anyway, because he is my son, and because some things are more important than dignity. The Haverford estate was everything you'd expect from a celebration that Linda had planned. White linen tables spread across a manicured lawn, a tent large enough to host a small concert, a string quartet playing near the fountain. Gary owned 3 car dealerships across the county, and he had never once let anyone forget it. The kind of man who upgraded his watch every time he upgraded his truck, who shook hands a half-second too long to make sure you noticed the weight of his ring. A young woman with a tablet checked my name at the entrance. I gave it to her, Robert Callahan, and watched her scroll through the list twice before looking up at me with the particular expression of someone delivering bad news to a stranger. "You're at table 19, she said. I thanked her and followed her directions around the backside of the tent, past the caterer's station, past the portable restrooms lined up along the perimeter fence. Table 19 was the last table before the equipment, a folding table, technically, covered with the same linen as the others, but positioned so that the generator hum from the sound system was a constant presence, and the foot traffic to the restrooms meant that every few minutes someone walked directly behind my chair. I sat down. I straightened my tie. I introduced myself to the retired couple beside me, who turned out to be neighbors of Linda's mother, people who had no idea who I was. I smiled. I ate the bread that was already on the table. I reminded myself that I was here for Tyler, not for any of this. Tyler looked extraordinary in his doctoral regalia. When he crossed the stage to receive his degree, I stood up before I even realized I was doing it, the only person at table 19 standing, clapping so hard my palms stung. He didn't see me. He was looking toward the front tables, toward his mother, toward Gary, toward the life that had been carefully constructed without me in it. Then came the reception toasts. Gary rose from the head table with the confidence of a man who had rehearsed this moment. He was heavier than the last time I'd seen him, his hair gone fully silver, but his voice still carried that particular brand of authority that came with writing large checks and knowing everyone in the room knew it. He tapped his glass once, twice, and the tent went quiet. 22 years ago, Gary began, a frightened little boy came into my life. 6 years old, missing his front teeth, carrying a backpack with a dinosaur on it. Soft laughter moved through the crowd. His mother told me he wanted to be a garbage truck driver when he grew up. More laughter. Today, that little boy is Dr. Tyler Hutchins. He paused on the name. Tyler's last name, legally changed when Gary had adopted him at age 9. and let the applause build before raising his hand to quiet it. Tyler, I want you to know that watching you become the man you are today has been the greatest privilege of my life. Your mother and I have given everything we have to make sure you had every opportunity, every resource, every advantage, and you took all of it and ran farther than either of us ever dreamed. He lifted his glass toward Tyler, his voice dropping to a register designed to carry just far enough. To my son, the doctor, the man I raised from the ground up, because some men are built, not born. The tent erupted, not born. I sat very still. I have replayed that moment many times since. Built, not born. 200 people raised their glasses, and I watched them do it, watched Tyler laugh and duck his head the way he used to when he was embarrassed by compliments, watched Linda press her hand to her chest like the words had moved her to the edge of tears. An older man at the table adjacent to mine leaned toward his wife and said, loud enough that I heard it clearly, that Gary is something else. That boy is lucky. His wife nodded without looking up from her phone. I did not cry. I have learned over the years how to hold things in a place where they cannot be seen. It is one of the few skills that extended loneliness teaches reliably. I excused myself before the entree was served, walked to the far edge of the property where the lawn met a low stone wall, and stood there looking out at the field beyond it. The evening was warm. Somewhere behind me a band had begun to play. I thought about the day Tyler was born, about standing in that hospital hallway at 3 a.m, still in my work clothes because Linda had called me from the job site and I had driven 90 miles without stopping. I thought about his first word, which was truck, and which I had celebrated embarrassingly. I thought about the years after the divorce. The years when I still had every other weekend and Tuesday evenings. The years before Linda met Gary and the calendar began to change. I drove home that night with the windows down and the radio off, trying to understand what exactly I had expected. You do not walk uninvited into your son's milestone celebration and expect to feel anything but what I felt. I had known that going in. The question I kept circling, the one that kept me awake that night staring at the ceiling of my apartment, was not about the toast or the seating or the invisible wall that had been built so carefully around Tyler's life. The question was simpler and older than any of that. Had I done enough? In the years when I still had access, when there was still a channel between us, had I done enough to make sure Tyler knew, beyond any version of events his mother could offer him, that I had wanted to be there? I was not sure. 3 days later, I was back at my desk at Callahan Infrastructure Solutions. I had started the company 11 years earlier with a single crew, a used excavator, and a line of credit that made me nauseous every time I thought about it. We had grown steadily since then. Water and sewer lines primarily, municipal contracts, the unglamorous but necessary work of keeping a region's infrastructure from collapsing. We employed 140 people. I had never named the building after myself. My office manager, Diane, knocked and set a folder on my desk without preamble. She had been with me for 9 years and had long since stopped softening things. Contract summary from the Haverford Estate job, she said. Full breakdown per your request. I looked up. The Haverford Estate. You asked me last week to pull any active or recent contracts with that venue before you approve the renewal bid. She paused. Is there a problem? No problem. Thank you, Diane. She left and I opened the folder. Callahan Infrastructure Solutions had been the primary contractor for the Haverford Estates drainage and utility upgrade, a $340,000 project completed 8 months prior. We had also, according to the summary Diane had compiled, serviced the adjacent municipal water main that supplied the venue and held the current maintenance contract for the underground utilities on that property. The tent my son's graduation had been held in had been standing on ground that my crews had worked. The water in the pitchers on every table, including table 19, had run through lines that my company maintained. I set the folder down. I am not a man who believes in signs. Particularly, but I sat there for a long time thinking about the particular shape of things. It got stranger from there. Diane, who had correctly interpreted my interest in the Haverford contract as something more than professional, began cross-referencing without being asked. Over the following week, she brought me a second folder, and then a third. Gary's dealerships, it turned out, had been using a fleet maintenance facility for the past 6 years, a facility that subcontracted its heavy equipment work to a company I had acquired 4 years ago as part of a regional expansion. We weren't the primary vendor, we were several layers removed, but every time Gary's service department needed a hydraulic lift repaired or a heavy equipment inspection, the work eventually flowed through a company that belonged to me. More than that, the commercial property where Gary's main dealership had operated for the past decade was managed by a regional property group, in which I held a minority stake. I had purchased the stake as a passive investment, and had never paid attention to the individual properties in their portfolio. The lease Gary signed every 3 years. The lease that kept his flagship dealership in the most visible intersection in the county had terms that were set, at least in part, by a valuation process that included my interests. I am not telling you that I intended any of this. I am telling you that sometimes a man spends years building something and does not fully understand what he has built until he looks at it from a certain angle. The last piece was the one that took my breath away. Tyler's medical school tuition, 4 years at a private institution, running close to $60,000 a year, had been partially covered by a merit scholarship from the Callahan Regional Health Foundation. I had established the foundation 7 years ago as a charitable arm of the business, focused on healthcare workforce development in underserved communities. The scholarship committee was independent. They had selected Tyler on his record alone. His record was extraordinary, I had never doubted that. And he had no way of knowing, and the committee had no way of knowing, that the young man whose application they were reviewing shared a last name with no one on the board, because he had legally taken his stepfather's name at age 9. My son had carried my family's investment in his future without ever knowing it was there. I sat with that knowledge for 2 weeks before I told anyone. I told Diane first because she had been the one to put the pieces together, and because she had earned the right to know. She cried, which surprised me. Diane is not a person who cries easily. "Does he know any of this?" she asked. "No." "Are you going to tell him?" I didn't answer that day. I wasn't sure. What I did know was that I was tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from working hard. I had been working hard my entire adult life. And that kind of tired was almost comfortable by now. This was the other kind. The kind that accumulates in the specific place where you have been holding something for too long. I wrote Tyler an email that evening. Not about the contracts or the foundation. Just a short, plain message. I was at your graduation. I sat in the back. You looked extraordinary up on that stage, and I am more proud of you than I have words for. I know things between us are complicated, and I am not asking for anything except to say that if you ever want to talk, I am here. Your dad, Robert. I pressed send before I could change my mind, and then I closed my laptop and went to bed. His reply came 9 days later. I had stopped checking by then, which is the only reason I didn't see it immediately. I was in the truck, heading back from a site visit, when my phone buzzed on the seat beside me. "Dad, I didn't know you were there. Can we talk?" I had to pull over. We met the following Saturday at a diner near his apartment in the city. A regular place, nothing memorable about it. The kind of booth where the seats are slightly too low and the coffee is reliably mediocre. Tyler was already there when I arrived, sitting with his hands folded on the table, and when he stood up to shake my hand, I did something I hadn't planned on doing. I hugged him instead. He hesitated for only a second before he hugged me back. And that second, that slight hesitation, the product of years of learned distance, told me more about the work still ahead of us than anything else could have. He looked like me. He had always looked like me. I wondered sometimes if that had made things harder for Linda, seeing my face in her son every morning. We ordered coffee. We sat in the particular silence of two people who have a great deal to say and no practiced language for saying it. Tyler spoke first. "Mom told me you left, that you decided work was more important than family. That you checked out." He said it without accusation, almost clinically, like a man who had organized these facts long ago and carried them in neat rows ever since. "That's the story I grew up with." "I know," I said. "What do you remember, on your own, before anyone told you what to think?" He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought he might not answer. "I remember your truck," he said finally. "I remember the smell of it. Sawdust and something else. I remember you used to let me shift the gears when we were in empty parking lots." A pause. "I remember you came to my school once, and I pretended I didn't see you because Mom was there and I didn't know how to." He stopped, looked at the table. "I was 8. I know. I didn't know you were still coming after that. I thought you stopped." I took the folded envelope out of my jacket pocket and set it on the table between us. Copies, not the originals. The originals were in a box in my storage unit that I had carried through 3 moves over 18 years. The copies were of the letters, the birthday cards, the certified mail receipts showing delivery attempts, the returned packages. 18 years of documentation that I had kept, not because I expected to use it, but because keeping it was the only way I had found to insist to myself that it was real, that I had tried, that it had happened. Tyler stared at the envelope without touching it. "I'm not showing you this to make you angry at your mother," I said. "I mean that. She made choices that I believe came from a place of fear, not malice. I'm showing you because you deserve to know your own story. All of it." He picked up the envelope, set it down, picked it up again. "What's in here? 18 years of me trying to reach you. Take it home. Read it whenever you're ready. Or don't read it at all. That's your right, too." He put it in his jacket pocket without opening it. We ordered more coffee, slowly, the way a conversation does when two people are feeling their way across uncertain ground. We began to talk about other things. His residency program, the apartment, a woman he was seeing, a nurse practitioner named Angela, who made him laugh. I told him about the company, about the crew, about a foreman named Dennis who had been with me since the first year and who I considered one of my closest friends. Small things, real things. The kind of things you talk about with someone you are carefully, deliberately beginning to know. He called me the following Wednesday. I was at my desk. I read the letters, Dad. I put down my pen. All of them. It took me most of the night. His voice was different. Thinner. The certified mail receipts. There are 37 of them. Did you know that? 37 letters sent certified mail, return receipt requested. I looked up what that costs. You did that for years. You were worth the postage, I said. He laughed. It was a short, wet laugh, the kind that happens when someone is closer to crying than they want to admit. Why didn't you fight harder? Why didn't you take her to court, force the issue? I had been asked this question before in my own head more times than I could count. I had a real answer ready, because every time I pushed, you pulled back. I could see it happening. You were a child, and the adults around you were in conflict, and children survive that by choosing sides. Every court date, every confrontation, every time I insisted on my rights, it cost you. You got quieter. You stopped making eye contact when I picked you up. I decided that my right to be your father was not worth more than your right to a peaceful childhood. So I chose to love you in the only way that didn't seem to cost you something. The silence on the line stretched long enough that I checked to make sure the call was still connected. "That's not fair," Tyler said finally. "That it worked out that way. That you had to make that choice." "No," I agreed. "It wasn't. I want to know about the foundation. The Callahan Regional Health Foundation." "The Callahan Regional Health Foundation." I was quiet for a moment. "How did you find out about that?" "I Googled you after I read the letters. I found the foundation's website. I found the scholarship listing. I found my own name in the 2019 recipient announcement." Another pause. "Dad, you paid for medical school. The foundation paid for part of it. The committee selects recipients based on merit alone. I was not involved in your application. But you built the thing that paid for it." "I built a lot of things," I said. "Some of them turned out to benefit people I love. I can live with that." He was quiet again. "Then how much of my life has been, is there more? Is there other stuff I don't know about?" I thought about Gary's dealerships, about the property lease, about the maintenance contracts that connected, several layers removed, to the way Gary had built his comfortable life in the same county where I had built mine. I made a choice in that moment. The same kind of choice I had been making for 18 years, the choice to prioritize Tyler's stability over my own need to be understood. "There are some business overlaps that would take a long time to explain," I said, "and honestly, most of them are things I didn't plan or engineer. They're just what happens when you spend 2 decades building a company in the same region where your son is growing up. But yes, there's more. Whenever you want to know, I'll tell you all of it." "Okay." "Okreth. Okay. I want to know. But not today. Today I needed to hear your voice." "I'm here," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." It took time. I want to be honest about that because I think the stories we tell about reunion always want to compress the hard part to get to the warmth faster. The truth is that Tyler and I spent the better part of a year learning how to be in each other's lives. There were phone calls that went well, and dinners that were stilted, and one afternoon in October when we got into an argument about something so small that neither of us could remember afterward what it had been about. Only that we'd said things that needed to be walked back, and that walking them back was its own kind of progress. He told Linda he was in contact with me. She called me for the first time in 11 years, and the call was hard and honest and went longer than either of us expected. She said she had been afraid. She said she had believed, or made herself believe, that keeping things simple, one father, clear lines, no confusion, was the right thing for a child. She said she wasn't sure anymore. I told her I appreciated her saying it. I did not tell her it was enough, but I did not hang up angry either. Gary was harder. The conversation Tyler had with him was one I was not present for, and Tyler has never shared the details with me, and I have never asked. What I know is that it happened, and that Tyler came to Sunday dinner at my house the following week, and ate 3 helpings of the chili I make from my mother's recipe, and talked for 2 hours and helped me wash the dishes before he left. Whatever had been said, he had come through it still standing. I told Tyler about the business connections eventually. All of it. The Haverford contract, the fleet maintenance chain, the property management stake. I showed him the same folders Diane had compiled. He sat across from my kitchen table, reading through them with the focused expression I had seen in photographs of him studying for boards, the same expression I recognized with a startled pride as the one I make when I am reading a contract. "You didn't plan this," he said. "It was not quite a question, no. But you could have used it at any point. You had leverage over Gary's business for years and you never used it. It wasn't mine to use. Your stability was more important than my pride." He closed the folder and looked at me for a long moment. You know what the irony is? Gary always talked about how he had built everything we had, that nothing had been handed to us, that we had earned our comfortable life through his hard work and discipline. Tyler set his hand flat on top of the folder. "I'm going to need some time with this. Take all the time you need." He nodded slowly. He was a good stepfather. I want to be clear about that. He showed up. He was present. He loved me in the ways he knew how to love. A pause. "But you were there too, in ways I didn't know about, in ways that were invisible." His voice shifted quieter. "That's the thing I keep coming back to. You were invisible, but you were there. The whole time." "The whole time," I said. "What I want to tell you, because you have stayed with me through all of this, is what Tyler's graduation had taken from me, and what the year that followed gave back. I had spent 18 years understanding my love for my son as a thing that existed in a sealed room, present, constant, generating its own heat, but with no outlet and no audience. What I found in that year was that the room had a door. It had always had a door. It just took both of us standing on opposite sides of it at the same moment, pressing our hands flat against it for it to finally open. Last spring, Tyler defended his residency capstone and I was there. Front row. He had sent me the invitation himself, a formal program with a sticky note on the front that said, "Save me a seat for dinner after." I wore the same dress shirt I had worn to his graduation. I figured it deserved a better night. He saw me when he walked in. He crossed the room and shook my hand and then changed his mind and hugged me, the way you hug someone when you have decided to stop being careful. His attending physician introduced himself and Tyler said, "This is my dad, Robert Callahan. He builds things." I shook the man's hand. I did not trust my voice to do much more than that. At dinner afterward, Tyler reached into his bag and handed me an envelope. Inside was a photograph, a printout, slightly grainy, the way screenshots always are. It was a picture of him at age 7, gap-toothed and grinning, sitting in the cab of a yellow excavator. I was standing beside the machine, one hand on the door, looking up at him with an expression I had forgotten I was capable of making. "I found it in a box of Mom's old pictures," he said. "I don't remember that day, but look at your face." I looked at my face. "I know what I look like in that picture," I said. "What?" "Like a man who has everything he needs." Tyler laughed. He reached over and took the photograph back, but gently, like something he intended to keep. Angela, sitting across from us, was pretending to study the menu. She was not entirely successful. I drove home that night with the windows up and the radio on, something I had not done in a long time. The roads were empty and the city lights were receding behind me, and I thought about my father, who had died when I was 34, and who had never been particularly good at being present, but who had, in the end, loved me the best way he knew how. I thought about all the ways that love fails its own intentions and all the ways it finds them anyway. I thought about Tyler, already a doctor, already more than I had dared to picture. I thought about Angela and the possibility of grandchildren and front rows and birthday parties where I would not be invisible. Some things you cannot rush. Some things you simply have to survive long enough to reach. Now I'm curious about you. Have you ever been through something like this? A love that had to travel farther than it should have to get where it was always trying to go? Drop your city in the comments. I want to know how far this reached. There's something I've come to understand slowly. The way you understand most things that matter. Not all at once, but in pieces over years when you're finally quiet enough to see the shape of it clearly. Robert didn't win because he was wealthy. He didn't win because his company happened to hold contracts connected to the people who had pushed him out. Those things were real, but they weren't the point. He won because he made a decision early on, quietly, without an audience, to keep showing up in the only ways that were still available to him. Certified letters. Birthday cards. A foundation that funded a young man's dream without ever asking for credit. He built his life with the same discipline he brought to every job site, steadily, without shortcuts, without needing anyone to applaud the work while it was happening. That is what I'd call moral endurance. Not sainthood, not the absence of anger. Robert was angry plenty of times in the privacy of his truck on empty roads, but he made the choice again and again to let his actions speak at a volume his words never could. That's not weakness. That is one of the hardest and most intelligent things a person can do. The cause and effect in this story isn't mystical. It's plain. A man who refuses to destroy what his child loves, even when he has every reason and every tool to do it, is a man who leaves the door open. And open doors, given enough time, tend to be walked through. Tyler found the letters because Robert kept them. Tyler called because Robert sent one honest email without demands. The relationship rebuilt itself because one person had spent 18 years refusing to let bitterness become his identity. Intelligence, in the deepest sense, is knowing what to do with pain that has no clean resolution. It is understanding that the story isn't over just because the current chapter is unbearable. Robert didn't have proof that Tyler would ever come back. He had no guarantee. He chose to behave as though it was possible anyway. Not out of blind hope, but out of a clear-eyed decision that the alternative, bitterness and withdrawal, would cost him the very thing he was trying to protect. That's the lesson I take from Robert's story, and from my own. The people who endure aren't the ones who feel less. They're the ones who refuse to let what they feel become the ceiling of what they do. They keep building. They keep showing up in whatever form showing up is allowed to take, and they trust, not in luck, not in fate, but in the compounding value of consistent character, that truth has a way of surfacing when the conditions are finally right. Tyler became a doctor because he was brilliant and driven, but he found his father because his father never stopped being worth finding. Those two things happen together, and neither one cancels the other out.